Hey there, I'm Alan Furstenberg,
And I'm Noble Ackerson,
and we are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Noble, great to have you back.
Good to be back. For some reason, you love the punishment. Keep bringing me back here.
Well, it's not so much that I love the punishment, which maybe I do. Well, no, what I love the punishment of is I keep diving into new technologies, and I am way, way, way over my head.
It's
And for some
modesty
of
here.
them, I know the best person that I can turn to ask questions about it is you. So you get stuck answering my stupid questions.
Well, what you don't know is I actually learn a lot through the conversations. If any of your listeners or viewers remember you could hear my brain churning trying to explain embeddings versus vectors. And I've got it now, but sometimes I learn a lot by having these conversations and just checks myself to see how well I understand a concept or how deep I understand a concept. So it's therapeutic for me as well.
And I've got to say, it's been interesting from the first time when we first started talking about it. And that was a subject I was totally unaware of until we started talking about it. And as we learn more, now I feel like it's everyone's talking about it. It's
Right.
huge. It's really
Wow.
out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'm kind of hoping this one is in the same vein. So when I asked you on, I kind of teased a little bit about what I was looking for. And we've seen a lot of stuff with open source LLMs recently. Big topic with Llama 2 coming out and Hugging Face doing a lot of stuff. And everyone seems to be releasing variants of Llama 2 or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm intrigued. I'm interested because the notion of running a pre-trained model locally makes sense to me. And then I kind of stumbled and said, well, I can't figure out what to do with this thing when I download it. You
Right.
know, how do I download it? Where do I download it from? What do I have once I have it? And what do I do with it? And how do I just get to the point where I can just send it API calls? Because, to give you another example, these days, if I need to run a database, I download MySQL, I run it, it gives me, a port on localhost that I can access. If I
Mhm.
want an indexing server, I use something like Apache Solr or, bunches of others. I download it, I run it, it gives me a port on localhost that I can access. Or if I wanted to run it on a cloud, I, put it off on a machine by itself and it has a port.
Right.
I have no idea how to do that with this stuff, with LLMs, with Llama. And that's kind of why I'm turning to you about.
All right. So yeah. I guess first, really good question and scenario. But before we dive into the weeds, let's try to understand why I would want to, as a developer, I think you use that as a use case, right, Alan?
Well,
Just any
this is
individual.
the developer show, so we like
Right.
focusing on developers
So as
here.
a voice developer, you want to kick the tires. There's one scenario where you may just want to pay someone, OpenAI or AWS or Cohere, Anthropic, with a closed source solution, API call, and follow their instructions and do your task, your specific task, like summarization, question and answering, conversations, that kind
Treat
of
it
stuff.
completely as a black box.
It's completely black box there, but that's not a determiner whether it's good or bad. These systems, historically, when you look at the benchmarks of some of these closed source system against an open source system, which we'll get into second, those systems, those closed source and proprietary system blow the open source systems away. They're so not, it's sometimes it's night and day. And I'm just sort of I'm thinking about Hugging Face's leaderboard. If you go to huggingface.com and you click on the model leaderboard and you sort it by performance, the Chat GPT 4, for example, is so good that variants of other open source system end up fine-tuning, and I'll get into that, fine-tuning their own performance against a closed source proprietary ChatGPT 4's outputs. Okay, so there's a reason why you may want to pay for OpenAI or Cohere or some other Anthropic, what have you. It's mostly because you just want the state-of-the-art performance, and you have, you figured out the tool, you're in that ecosystem, whatever.
And I think that last point's an important one, is that it's not, you can't just jump between LLMs. You can't take your existing prompts and use them on this other LLM unchanged. I mean, you can, but you don't know that they're going to work nearly as well.
Right. You need to tune it because they're trained differently. The way their inference works may be different. What one system may expect as far as how you coax it or how you chain your prompts. And then you've also got like something that very well, like intermediaries like LangChain or Llama Index to help you sort of construct this, and then just hot swap one model versus another, for lack of a better way to put it. And so, yeah, that's one reason. Performance, state of the art might be one reason. Another is ecosystem. There are many reasons why you might do that.
But I get the feeling there are also some really good reasons why you'd want your own model, your local, either running locally or under your control or whatever. So
let's
I can think of two. I'm curious
let's enumerate those. What do you like? Can you think of some idea? I know you're new to this, maybe perhaps, but can you enumerate a couple examples? I have a score of them, but
well, the biggest one that I think of is, and it's one that I hear from my clients and a bunch of other people all the time, is privacy security type issues. I have my proprietary data, that either that even if I just want to use it as part of a prompt and get it back, I don't necessarily want that data becoming part of the training material or the testing material for OpenAI or Google or whoever. And even if they're assuring me that it's not used that way, we promise, I don't know how much I trust that. And similarly, if I am a medical institution, I can't.
It's a non-starter.
I need something local.
Yeah. So there are regulatory reasons. There are, privacy reasons. I work with some customers at NavAir and military type things. There's IP, intellectual property, or what we call DLP, data loss prevention reasons. And you bring up a very good one. Actually, one quick, I guess, actually moment is not even a quibble, is that Google, Anthropic, OpenAI most famously, actually don't promise you that they won't use your data. They do quite the opposite. They make it very clear that these large language models that we're using, whether either directly through the API or through the chat interface, the generative pre-trained transformer interface, conversational interface, are also augmented and trained with other models that humans have gone through to refine, with the promise of the value add that by having a human pair with the machine's output, you're able to get more sensible responses. And this is more applicable to code and patterns that Python may have or Django may have versus Java, right? You almost need human experts to go in, and that's famously called reinforcement learning with human feedback, which we'll get into open source in a second, but Meta has adopted in their release of their Llama 2 large language models. And the reason why I bring that up is because, you know, these language models are not just one massive model. They're actually an ensemble of other models that come together. And I know I'm getting off subject here, but I wanted to make this point that a human is in the loop, right? To use some sort of reinforcement learning to, it's a completely different model that's fed back in to reward ChatGPT or what have you, as its, responses or sound less robotic or less corporate.
Okay, so that's fair. That's a very good point.
So I'll say some use cases. And what we found is that we can build these amazing software products, right? And take it out in the field. We'll be out in the heat of Mali, Bamako, or someplace in Eastern Asia. But then we'll quickly find that, internet connectivity is really bad.
Yes.
So I'll take what you prompted there to a whole nother level and ask the question, not only why do you want to run your large language model locally, but why would you even want to run it on the edge? And the reason is out where there's a lack of internet connectivity, reason number one is internet connectivity, you can actually have the smarts of a local model running on a tablet if it's optimized for a machine. And there's a lot of work and research right now to further optimize these models to run locally on those machines, integrate them and have them locally, and and it's almost like a federated learning kind of approach.
Okay, so
That's
sold me.
Reason number one.
Okay, you've sold me on this notion. You have, because I do believe we need to have these models running locally. But me as a developer, if I'm used to OpenAI, I have an API call that goes and hits a server. If I'm using a weirdo language, I have a REST API that I can use. Right. I know how to do that. Right. If I'm going Google, I've got a REST API. I know how to do that. If I'm using Anthropic, I've got a REST API. I know how to do it. If I'm using Llama 2 on my local machine, what do I do?
Oh my goodness. Guess what? I've got news for you. A REST API.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. This has been two voices. No. So how do I get to that REST API? Where do I download it from? What am I doing? How do I run it? What do I need to know?
Depending on the model, you might take different paths, but I'll give Llama 2 because I literally just finished a talk where I sort of walked through the entire process for an audience. Llama 2 is available for the general public in commercial use, which is very rare with open source language models. First, you need to download the model, right? For Meta, they're saying, for me, going to download the model is not as easy as I thought. So I just went there, I went in and signed up. You got to put your email so that they have my personal identifiable information. Sure, Meta, go ahead. And I get approved almost instantly, which is amazing. And then for me, because I want to use a couple tools from also in the open source community, because I'm not a transformer model expert or researcher. I want to sort of stand on the shoulders of giants, as we do with any API call, right? I go in and register also for the Llama 2 model on Hugging Face as well. So Hugging Face is basically a GitHub, model hub, everything hub for machine learning and AI. And so any model, any algorithm, any data set that you're looking for, it's like a mashup of Kaggle and GitHub versus something.
Okay. So
we've downloaded the model.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's actually quite simple from there. So you've downloaded the model. Now you need to define, first define what you want to do with the large language model. Hopefully you've done that. You understand, I'm a developer and I just want a local thing because I work for Coca-Cola and I don't want the secret of Coke to come out. And so my local language model is just sitting there. How do I interact with it? Well, you need a way to talk to this language model. So you need something like a tokenizer, something that if you, I'm starting at the end, so that if you do query this large language model, it can convert your natural language into
Okay.
Right.
So we need a tokenizer. So that's interesting. I hadn't realized that.
You do. If you're using the transformer library from Hugging Face, there's a GPT-2 tokenizer that's part of the system. If you're using Llama 2, I was reading something called Q Laura. It's a white paper. It comes bundled with, it's not bundled, but there are libraries available for you to sort of pull from to sort of basically you downloaded your pre-trained data set and anyway, so I'm just milking. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so I need a tokenizer. Does the tokenizer have to be a specific one that works with the language model?
No. Oh, no, yes and no. Yes, if you're willing to put in some. Oh, no, if you're willing to put in some additional work, right? If you're not willing to put in, the actual, tuning it to it. Often the documentation will tell you what to do, which is how I just read the docs, and it's I don't just use any off-the-shelf tokenizer like TikTokin from OpenAI. I just used the Hugging Face tokenizer that was available for the Llama 2 model. So and I don't know why. There might be a reason for that, and it might be what I'm sort of reading what you might be coming, but I'm not really sure.
Well, maybe this is my ignorance here, but if the model, I feel like I'm missing a piece here. My naive take would have been, well, I need to use the same tokenizer because that's the data that the model's been trained on. That's the data that the model has, isn't it?
A native tokenizer?
Well, the fact that it's taken all of these texts and tokenized them.
Right.
And you need to use the same tokens.
Right.
You need to, I think of it kind of like an encoding decoding system. I need to encode my queries with the same encoder that the model encoded all of its training material on. Don't I?
So maybe you're right. I don't know for sure. I do remember with Llama 2, there was something called an auto tokenizer library. I did not dig into that auto tokenizer to understand what was happening in the background.
Okay.
You may be spot on.
Okay, so it sounds like this may be something that's part of the model somewhere.
It's its own model that may be part of the model as well.
Okay.
The tokenizer, I remember, is like a tokenizer.model gets invoked when you run your auto tokenizer thing. So yeah. All right, so you got your model. It's in your environment behind your VPC or on your local machine. How do you talk to it? Well, it's kind of like you hinted at with OpenAI or Google. You need to host the model in the same way you do with a simple API.
Okay.
Right? And so you're basically using an API framework of your choice. If you're, if you love GCP stuff, as we all do, Cloud Run is one approach. Fast API, Flask.
Well, but if I'm running this locally,
you're running this locally. I would say just use Flask, right? So import the library locally and just run everything, on the edge on your device.
Okay. Run it. I mean, run it where?
Okay.
I feel like this is the part that I keep I keep not being able to wrap my head around is maybe, and again, maybe it's ignorance on my part, but I've got this model. It's not a Windows executable. It's not a Linux executable.
But it's a library. It's a library that can run locally, right? So Flask is a library that you do need to download from somewhere, right? But once it's on your machine, just like any executable, it can run locally. And you just need to configure it. You have your, your route, whatever. If it's you want your endpoint to be /query that you want to use to hit your large language model. That would be a post method. You want to, trying to remember the steps. I've done this a few times, but this essentially just need to give it an input text request. You do need to pass that tokenizer as well. So you want to include that in that so that, since you're sending that over to the model, so it knows how to interpret the text. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's a library. I've now got
yeah,
a library for what runtime environment?
For your, it's so I'm Python, so I'm thinking just Python.
Okay,
there's a Node version of it. There's yeah, you can do it's just a API call, like a locally hosted API call.
So okay, so it really
instead of exposing it to the World Wide Web, you would expose it to localhost, right?
So hang on. I'm trying to make sure I wrap my head around this because I'm really not sure I have. When I download it, when I download the model, I need to what I'm downloading, I need to specify whether I want the Python library or the Node library or the something else.
So you can interface with this downloaded model in, as long as you have the skills, you can use any RESTful API service.
This is what
you're stuck. Go ahead.
This is the little bit where I keep getting lost. I feel like that means I need to be running. So I need to be running this model somehow.
So hear me out. We'll get there. So we're going to get into how you query the model in a second, but this is what I'm saying is no different. Maybe I'm overcomplicating it. It's no different than your local development environment, right? When you're working on localhost with a specific port that you care about,
right? But when
I'm working, it's not talking to the web.
No. I get that part, but like if I've got if I'm running, if I've developed something, and it's going to be listening on port 2242. Okay. I have a Node server that's listening on port 2272.
Sure.
Or a Python server that's listening on port 20, or a Java or a something server.
Right.
What
do the same with, if you're using a Node server, sure. If you're using, I use Python equivalents to that.
Okay, but then how do I get from that to, how do I make the call to the model?
Okay, I haven't gotten to that yet. So all right, great.
This is the part that's driving me nuts here.
We're vibing. You're getting ahead of me. So I was stuck on trying to help you with the local environment thing, but I know you're being facetious a little bit because you know what a local environment. You're a long-time developer. I've known you for a long time.
Right. But the part I don't get. I mean, for example, if you told me if I needed a way to access a database, yes, I would need to have the database drivers or the ODBC or the JDBC in my environment. I get that part, and then I have to run the database separately.
Right. Same thing with running your local Flask API or Fast API or Flask service. You've got all your binaries locally. You've got all your, basically that library file that you brought in. You set up your server locally, right? You give it an endpoint. We'll call it query. You just set up a post endpoint. Okay. And then now when you want to query against it, you're basically pointing to your local, your locally downloaded model. and I'm oversimplifying here because it's hard for me to think through the code and sort of say it out loud. However, you send your HTTP, it's just an HTTP call, right? It's a post request to that endpoint that you created to query your model. It's no different. That payload is no different from a response call that you would give, you know, a login request or whatever. You're basically just saying, hey, for this endpoint / localhost / port / query, I want this JSON payload of hello world, or, you know, complete this sentence once upon a time, comma, whatever.
Okay.
All right. And then you ask it to print your result. And so what's happening is you're talking to your model, making that request. It's going to spit out a result. All right, I'm going to pause here for a second.
Okay.
So let me sort of, if I can try to summarize here. You get whatever libraries that you need. I skipped that part. Like, you know, get whatever libraries, your Node, your Ruby.
Yeah.
You load your model. You've downloaded, obviously. You load your model.
How do you load your model?
The model comes. So have you ever downloaded the I would say actually, yeah, that's probably part of the thing.
That's the
yeah. So it is basically a couple files that literally just a couple files that are on the machine, large files. And when you create your server of sorts, your local server, you're pointing out, I just left it in the same directory. I was like saying, hey, you know, talk to this this thing, this binary file, or this file is going to be listening for, you go, there's a step that I think I'm missing, and this is what's causing the confusion. But I'm not going to obsess about it too much.
No, I think this
as soon as we get off the call, I'm going like, and I should have also had my VS Code open, and maybe that could have been helpful. Anyway, that's fine. But yeah, you're loading the model, and then we have a question mark on that. We're creating an API, whatever means that you have in order to talk to said model, and then we're querying the model. Those are the basic steps.
See, I feel like the part though that I'm missing,
okay,
is that interface point to the model itself.
Okay, so
how you know, I have through whatever method I have, my server has a string that is going to be the prompt.
Right.
I want to get that prompt
right
into the model and get the response from the model, and then do something with that.
Fair.
It's that very, very specific interface where I feel like I'm missing something.
Right. Okay.
And to give you the analogies again, you know, if I am searching for something using an indexing server, I have the string that I want to search for.
Yep.
I will send that to the indexing server on a port. It will send back a response with some data. That interface is where I'm.
So that interface is locally. That interface, I think, is handled by a library that you can invoke against this model that you've downloaded, and it could be different for different proprietary models. For Llama 2, I had to import a the transformer model, because these things are transformer models. So import transformers. And then I give it a pipeline, right? An object, where this pipeline object, where I say, hey, you're going to be, you're going to be expecting a text generation if that's your task. It's going to be a model. You're going to need you're going to expect whatever request that gets posted to you, you're going to expect a tokenizer, or like, tokens, or you're going to be doing the job of sort of converting to tokens in order to make sense. If you're using Keras or PyTorch, there's some other things that you need to do. And then, so that's the pipeline. And then there's another, to what you're saying with the string of text, where the prompt actually comes, there's another pipeline, and that's going to be your sequence, right, for the task that you need. And there also, I believe you give it, I'm going to say like an array, or like just basically an array of different questions that you might want to ask, or just one, just clear string.
Okay,
yeah. And
again,
then
I'm just trying to boil it down to its most essence here.
Yeah. You would give it some of the things that we're familiar with on the proprietary source, like, on Google's Model Garden, if you, or the
right, you'll be giving it additional parameters,
parameters,
the
like, how creative you want to be, and all that stuff, and then print that sequence. That's the instruction that within your environment, you're pointing to, you within your code, or your code, you're saying, for this locally downloaded model, you're downloading, you're importing all that stuff, and it's going to say, from where. If it doesn't have the model within a directory that you pointed to, it's going to error out. Yeah, go ahead.
So I feel like what I may be hearing is that we have a model, and in Python, there is a library somewhere that knows how to load this model and pass parameters to it. And in Node, there is a library somewhere that knows how to load the same model.
Same thing, yeah.
And pass parameters to it.
If it's supported, right? Like, yeah. And that's one more plus for open source, is that if there is no JavaScript library for the thing that is emergent, and Alan Furstenberg will go out and build one.
Well, that's the nice theory anyway. But
you built one for LangChain.
Well, but here's the thing. I built one for LangChain several abstraction layers up.
Oh, okay.
We're talking pretty low down at this point. I mean, I built it in LangChain because I had a REST API that I was able to call.
Right.
Okay. I don't know what it is that I'm calling here. That's kind of, in some ways, maybe the question.
I need to go back to what we can do is, for this episode, I'm going to paste I'm going to make sure that you include the Transformers paper, which is literally how we're talking to this model, basically to the crux of what you're asking, that gets into the details that I'm certainly missing. And if you want to take it a step further for fine-tuning, there's another paper from Microsoft called Parameter Efficient Fine-Tuning, I believe.
Well, but here's the thing, and I want to talk about fine-tuning is a whole other kettle of fish.
That's another beast. Yeah.
I'm just trying to start. I'm this poor PHP developer who now wants to get involved in AI stuff, and I'm used to running all my stuff locally. How do I run this AI thing locally? That's kind of the question. I've downloaded this model.
Right.
What do I do with it? How do I,
downloaded this model? To talk to the model locally, or even not locally, you need a library called a transformer library.
Okay, so we need a transformer library.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Which makes it
So where do we find said transformer libraries?
Oh, good question. A couple places, either directly on the model owner's website, but more increasingly lately, it's on Hugging Face's website, where you probably find an entire, you get hit in the face with so many variants of what you need.
So the keywords that we're looking for on Hugging Face is transformer library.
Right.
And what we'll be able to do with the transformer library is,
or not even Hugging Face. I apologize. If you're working within an environment, like I'm a Python guy, you're pip installing transformers.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, that's literally the command: pip install transformers.
Correct.
Okay.
If you're within a secure, bunker thing,
presumably, then you can go look up what you can download the transformers code and look at it, and
yeah, you do that yourself, exactly.
You go to the revision, but you go to the library, you find out where, similar on Node, you go to npm,
Right.
and it tells you where the source for this thing is if you need
Exactly.
to.
Exactly.
Do you happen to know offhand what the Node version of this is, or I get to go look that one up
I
myself?
believe it would be npm transform. Transformers are so widely used now. I wouldn't be surprised if it is just what you might imagine. They probably own that scope.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, where were we? Pip install transformers. You import that model using the transformers model.
Right. So you import the library, and then you
Yeah,
tell the
yeah,
library in some way, you point it at the model file, or
exactly.
the different models files, because you said you've got a bunch of different models that you're going to need.
Right, exactly.
Okay. I
So
think
you get
this is piecing together for me now.
Are we vibing?
I think so.
Good. Did I skip that step? I thought I mentioned that a few times before.
Well, but you may have, and I may have missed it because it wasn't connecting that this is, the linchpin here is you said you have a library that gets loaded, and my question is, so is this a different, when you specify your model, do you need to specify which environment? And I think that was the piece that I missed, is that no, there is a library that knows how to run these models.
Do you know how you remember how we started this podcast, where I said I learn a lot from you?
Yeah.
As much as you learn from me. And we've been friends for a decade plus because of that.
We have been friends for just over a decade now, yes.
Right. So right now, what I'm realizing in this conversation is because we both give a lot of public speaking engagements, and this question is going to come up. So now I can just give them the abstracted high level, download it. You download the model into your development environment. You pip install transformers to answer the burning question that I think I don't even know at this point whether I mentioned or not. I did mention about the importing the model into your code, and there's a tokenizer piece to it. We both know why that's needed at this point. I don't want to go over that again.
But that's something that your transformer library, you'll be loading through the transformer library.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Or else so when you download the transformer libraries, there are a bunch of different functions and classes that you would invoke, and this transformer library, I imagine, I haven't again peeled the onion on that or looked behind the wall. I should. I've read part of the paper, haven't even finished that. But it supports many types of models, and it will continue to support many types of models.
So what you're saying is that, if you are building something that is chat oriented, you'll be using one set of functions for the transformer. Right. Whereas if you're going to be using the LLM to do embeddings, that's another set of functions in the transformer. But again, it still kind of boils down to, you've got the transformer, you are loading in your model into the transformer and then doing stuff with it.
Bravo.
That's kind of what it boils down to.
Right.
Yeah. So basically, the linchpin part here boils down to, once you've got the transformer library, the model loaded in, you then do whatever you want with it. You write your own server that does something with it. You just write, something that calls it directly.
Why you would want to do that, that's a different story, but yes.
Right. I guess I would imagine that it makes sense, though, to load the model once, because I imagine that's a big operation, and then keep that running.
Right.
So you're not going to, load the model, send it one prompt, and then the program quits.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem efficient.
So now you're getting into utilizing your local environment's CPU, GPU, and memory.
Okay.
Right. And so how you it depends on your use case. There might be some use cases that you may want to load the model every time. It makes no sense, counterintuitive, but it might make sense for your use case.
Okay.
So
I won't
remember,
dispute this, but okay.
well, remember I started with one use case where I don't even think I finished the thing, where it's offline and you've got a couple-year-old Android device that a
Okay, no,
tablet.
that's a fair point. You know, if you
Exactly.
don't have
So
the memory to support more than one thing running at once, you may need to unload it. And but
100%.
that's a reasonable trade-off. That's a fair point.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's why. And frankly, back then we were using NLTK, like we were using very primitive natural language processing techniques. But even then, having that flexibility out in the field somewhere so that they can just sort of do translation,
Yeah.
you locally without talking to the internet or depending on the internet.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. So I hope we've gotten people who are interested in doing this and who have not thought to do this before.
Mm-hmm.
We've given some of the early tools to get started with it.
Absolutely. And I would say definitely start there. Download, Beluga or whatever the model you want with, and sort of use these generative pre-trained models or Gen AI tools to your advantage. I built an entire fine-tuned model in a week, running
We're going to need to
on a
talk about
CPU.
fine-tuning another time.
Yeah, absolutely. We should.
And we may dig into some of the differences between these models another time.
Let's
And
do
I
that.
definitely want to have a conversation with you about open versus closed and exactly
Let's
where
have
those
a
fits on the
classic
platform.
Alan Noble debate.
Classic debate. We're going to have to save that one for another time.
Right.
But in the meantime, I want to hear how people are using this, what kind of problems people run into, or if this is, answers your questions spot on. So we'll take those up another time, and we will have this debate another time on
Awesome.
Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Thank you again, Noble. This is, as always, enlightening.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I will always return whenever you need me to.